emotions can be really tricky and they can tell you all kinds of stories. And I've learned enough to know that if I can, and I have the luxury of giving myself even 5 minutes to figure out what exactly I'm feeling, I can recalibrate. I don't need 24 hours all the time, like even 5 minutes, just to be able to give myself the privilege of naming my own emotion so that I can face it and then work with it and work through it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Flow Over Fear. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm glad you're here because we have a great guest. Her name is Zovig Garboushian, and she is the founder of Boldness Ablaze, a company that helps leaders break through personal limitations to achieve authentic success. With over 25 years of experience in brand marketing, management consulting, and leadership development, Zovig's mission is to help leaders reconnect with themselves as their primary source of truth, so that they can lead with less stress and more ease. And through her coaching, speaking, workshops, Zovig has supported hundreds of leaders, from C-suite executives to business owners, to expand their definitions of success and go beyond their horizon lines. And she has a special place in her heart for advancing women in leadership, which we'll talk about today. And she's a consultant, a thought partner, and a sounding board for her clients, helping them to do the work in resetting status quo. And she's worked with teams and some of the biggest names in tech and finance, including Accenture, New York Life, Google, Microsoft, Planned Parenthood, all sorts of companies. And she is dedicated to helping her clients feel at home in their skin so they can stop worrying about getting it right and go after what matters the most. Zovig, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Adam. Wow, it's so interesting to hear the bio read back to you.
Isn't it?
It's such an interesting experience. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. I get that a lot. And one reason I love to do that, like to actually read your words coming out of it, is because I love for the guests to hear what they are and what they truly represent. And I hope that you hear that, because you are a powerful force in the world, and I'm grateful that you're here. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'd love to start kind of with, your background and where you've come from, because you've come from the corporate world. You're now in the executive coaching world. And how did that transition take place? Because I know that there's a lot of fear, a lot of, maybe challenges that happen on both sides. Can you maybe compare and contrast those two experiences in your life?
Sure. Yeah. So I started out working. My first job was in 2000, and I went into media, and I was in magazines when magazines were cool. I still think they're kind of cool, but back when magazines were like it. And I was in marketing and managed to work my way up. I started in California in an outside sales office, and then because I was scrappy, got myself into an executive assistant role in New York. And so that was really where things took off. And I shifted over into marketing. I started leading events and did print marketing and digital marketing when websites really started picking up, and seemed to be really good at the work and could do really good work because I was a hustler and I wasn't afraid to put in the work, but I didn't love the work. And that was the problem. The other challenge I had was I didn't realize that I didn't love the work for a long time. I just was going along thinking this is what you do. You work hard, you graduate, you get a job, you get promoted, you make money, and then you retire. That was how I was taught to think about my career. And it works just fine, right? There's nothing wrong with that formula at all. But it was in my mind, a very traditional approach to a career. And so it took me some time and a lot of self-work and therapy and coaching and all kinds of retreats and self-discovery and, that kind of learning for me to realize, oh, hey, this doesn't feel right because it isn't right for me.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know, maybe you've experienced this, maybe some of your listeners have experienced this. When you've been going down a path for a certain amount of time, and at this point it was like 13, 14, almost 15 years, it's like, well, who am I and what do I do if not this? If I'm not a marketer, what am I? Right? And so finally, I hesitated and hesitated and hesitated to look for new things because I didn't know how. And then one day, the universe threw me a bone and I got laid off. And I got laid off twice. Now, for me, the experience was an opportunity. For some, I understand getting laid off. It can range. The experience can range from like, oh, thank goodness, to oh my goodness, what am I going to do, right? And so,
Right.
for me, thankfully, I had the experience of having a little bit of savings, so I had a little bit of time. And the first time I got laid off, I made my first pivot, and I was doing some freelance work for a company that was a career website, and they also offered so it was like a job board, and they also offered online learning courses. So if you were getting a new job and you wanted to skill up in something, we had courses that you could take. And I've always been extremely interested in learning, professional development, and personal development. Any organization that is about growth was really attractive to me. And so while I was doing some freelancing, I happened to hear, like, in the hallway, that they were hiring for a director of education. And I thought, well, I don't know anything about this, but I'm pretty sure I could figure out how to do it. So I raised my hand. And because I had been doing work for them, they knew me, and it just worked out. So that was my first pivot into learning and development. And they let me have fun with it. I got to host webinars, hire instructors, train them on how to create online learning content. I mean, it was really an exploration and an experiment for me that yielded some really cool opportunities and results. And then when I left New York, because it just was time for me to go, brought that job with me, and I was remote working before the pandemic hit. And then I got laid off again. The company was bought, and I got laid off a second time. And that was when I shifted into organizational consulting. So now I've gone from this corporate experience to consulting, which was a little different because you're on the outside. You're not quite, you're going into these corporate organizations, but you're not in the game with them. You're helping them. So it was a bit of a different vantage point.
Right.
And it was in those moments where I was noticing that people were responding to me as a coach. My clients were responding to me as if I was coaching them. And it's something I've always found ways to lead or teach or share an idea with someone and see how someone could take it on and make it their own. And so I thought, you know what, if this is how they're responding to me, maybe this is a thing. Maybe I need to just do this and make it legit. So I did. I went and I got some training, and I started my own business. And that was just over 4 years ago. And I've been doing executive coaching and speaking and management training for the last 4 years.
That's incredible.
And yeah, it was kind of an incremental pivot, right? It
Right.
was like a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. Got it. I'm here. Yeah. So
That's
so I've seen it from like all the sides. Being in corporate, where like you speak in the language, you're using the acronyms, you're doing the thing, right? You're being the good corporate citizen. You're playing in the hierarchy. And there was always a part of me that was like, oh, but we're so much more than this org chart. That's it. Like there's more here. And then I had more room to play. Thankfully, I landed in some good places that allowed me freedom to play and to speak up and use my ideas. And now I understand if you're going to build a career in a larger company, you have to play the game, right? Like there's a
right.
design built, there's a system, but you can still be you and find ways to authentically. And when I say authentic, I mean that who you are, how you feel on the inside matches how you behave on the outside. That's what I mean by authenticity. You can still find ways to do that so that you don't feel like you're lost, because I felt like I was lost.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was my experience.
Yeah. And I know that a lot of people feel lost in their careers or lost in their lives, or they feel like even that they have this certainty of what they want to do, but there's just maybe this big gap between where they are and where they want to be, or
Yeah.
this feeling of self-doubt that they can't make that leap. Like, what was it for you? I mean, as far as when you started kind of in that career, when did it hit you like this may not be for me, and I may need to
Yeah.
move?
Um, I had a I had a couple of experiences. One was an associate publisher. So if you work in magazines, you understand that the publisher runs the sales side of everything. It's not the editorial. And then there's an associate publisher, and he or she is like in the day-to-day muck of the sales, right?
Right.
That person, I had an associate publisher march into my office, like barreled in there and yelled at me about why I wasn't giving their salespeople what they wanted from the marketing perspective, right? And it was almost like a cartoon where like someone yells and like your hair blows back. Like that was what the visual felt like to me. Like I was just blown back into my seat. Like this person is yelling at me in the
Right.
office. And listen, at that time, you come with fire, I'm going to give you fire. And so, so my initial reaction, it was not a response, it was a reaction, was because the ideas are stupid. That was how I responded. Also, not a good reaction. I completely, if I could do it again, I would. But in that moment, I realized, wow, if something can bring that out in me, this is not the right place for me.
Yeah.
I am not being my best self when I react that way. It's not okay.
Yeah.
No matter what that person did, right? And there was that. And so that was a pretty poignant moment. And then I also, it wasn't, this was more like a slow burn, but I realized that I couldn't define or describe myself to myself because I kept getting cluttered with, well, you're a marketer and you're a project manager and you're a this and you're a that. And I couldn't actually define who I was to myself. And I thought, well, that's really not encouraging because I'm living my entire life in my body and yet I can't describe who I am because I'm so cluttered with what I have been told I am.
Wow.
At least from from all many perspectives, but definitely from the professional perspective.
Yeah.
And that to me felt just really incongruent with who I was. Like that's not right for me to not be able to define myself to myself, to like understand and describe what I'm about, just to me.
Yeah.
So it was a combination of those two experiences where it was like this, I am in the wrong place. This is the wrong fit.
That's it. And
Yeah.
that hits because, like, a lot of times, a lot of us feel it. I've never heard it presented like that, but that's really relatable. The idea that, we're in a spot, we're in a role, or we're in something where it just doesn't feel congruent and it clouds us to how to understand ourselves.
Yeah.
So knowing what you know now, what would you tell, Zovig from back then to try
Yeah.
to, I guess, get yourself to get that clarity? What would you say?
You know more than you think you do. I think that I really believed. Now, I'm not saying I knew everything. I mean, these were my 20s, my early 30s. Like, you got a lot to learn, right? But I think I knew intuitively more than I gave myself credit for.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if I had trusted myself a little, just even like 15% more, I think I could have made a different choice earlier on in my career. I don't regret the time that I spent. Look, New York City and working in media in that place taught me a lot. Like you could not mess with me after that, right? Like I'd seen it all. Nothing was going to surprise me. I was a tough cookie, all that stuff. But I didn't trust myself. And that I think is our biggest, like, you don't have a lot to bank on in this world, Adam, right? Anything
Right.
can be stripped away from you in a moment. People, your health, money. But to trust myself, that knowing that no matter what happens, I will find a way to pay the rent, to do whatever I will find. It might not be attractive and it might not be ideal, but I would find a way. Like to trust that I knew more about me and what I could do than I was giving myself credit for. I wish that is the advice I would have given me at 15 years ago.
That's great advice. And do you think that a lot of us, a lot of people out there are not trusting enough of themselves or their guts and where does that trust come from? Is it a gut feeling? Is it your heart? How do you feel that?
Gosh, I mean, if I knew the answer to that, Adam, I'd be a gajillionaire. And, but I have intuitions and thoughts about it. I don't know
Sure.
that I don't know that it applies to everyone and everything. But I do think a lot of us, and I've worked with many really capable, competent, extraordinary leaders who still have this moment where they're just not trusting their intuition, their decision making, their choices. It's like there's just not this trust. And I don't think it's our fault. I think it comes from our lived experiences. It comes from the stuff that we get told, either from our families, our culture, the institutions where we spend our time. Things like racism and genderism and sexism and all those things, they send messages, right? And they conflict with that quiet inner voice and that quiet inner knowing. And it's really easy to get pulled in different directions by that stuff because look, we are not rewarded for trusting ourselves. We're rewarded for what we produce in the world. We get
Yeah.
raises and bonuses and praise and accolades and fame and fortune because we produce stuff. We put stuff out there for people to see and look at and use.
Hmm.
We don't get rewarded for being self-aware. Like you're not getting a bonus, your quarterly
Right.
bonus for being the most self-aware.
Right. Right.
And so I think that it's super easy to get pulled into the external world of things because that is what we are, that's what the world is designed around. And so it can be easy to forget, like, wait, our source of wisdom is actually, no one can see me right now, but I'm pointing to my heart, like it's inside.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if we can stop ourselves, just this is why things like even meditation, quiet time, journaling, whatever you want to call it, like moments where you're not talking and you're not distracted are so important because that's when that voice can speak and be heard. But, in a place like New York, good luck finding quiet time. I
Right.
mean, my brain actually unconsciously started waking me up at 4 a.m. for years because I think my I call it my spirit, like just knew like this is the only quiet time you're going to get today.
Wow. Wow.
And so I started just naturally waking up at 4 a.m. and for a long time didn't understand it and was kind of mad about it. Like I want to sleep in,
Yeah.
but my body, my spirit, my heart wouldn't let me because I think it was craving quiet.
Yeah. And and from your perspective on living in New York, I mean, I've been there once in the city,
Mhm.
and it's crazy. 3 days. It was an amazing time. I loved
Yeah.
it there. But man, living there, that's like a whole other level of anxiety and crazy. And
Yeah, and it
but yeah.
was. And it was. And I was there for 17 years
Wow.
and it was,
Hmm.
you learn a lot about I learned a lot about who I was because of that place.
Hmm.
But when I was done, I was done. And it was clear and it was almost like the city told me, you're done. It's time for you to go now. I remember the
Yeah.
last straw was like my keys fell down the elevator shaft in my apartment building and I was like,
Man.
okay, I get it. It's time.
They are
I just
becoming
watched them
part of it.
fall.
Yeah, that's a signal that yeah, you got to
Yeah.
leave. That's funny.
Yeah.
So, and where did you go to? I'm curious. So, what you went from the
Oh,
city to where?
yeah. I went back to the West Coast. So now I live just outside of Seattle, Washington,
Oh, nice. Okay.
in a very rural town called Woodinville.
Oh, nice.
It
Very
is the
cool.
exact opposite of Manhattan and Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And, I am not outdoorsy, by the way, but I love the trees and the green and the air and the sounds and, I've made my peace with the bugs and all of that. I went from, very, very city girl and to, I want to see trees outside my office window.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and that's what I have.
That's
So I have the
nice.
quiet in the space now, but it took me about, I don't know, about I've been here 5 years. It took me about 3 years for my body to realize you are no longer in New York. You don't have to rush and hurry and push. And it took my mind and my heart and my body time to catch up that I
Yeah.
had left.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I can imagine it's a big switch, and I've never lived in a big city. I mean, I've always
Mhm.
lived way out in the suburbs and outside of Los Angeles and all that. But it's but going into cities, I can't imagine the anxiety that it is to feel there. But and working, as you did within the magazines and all that kind of stuff, as a woman and as someone who evolved into leadership, how was that experience for you? Now was that media industry, was that more of a male dominated world, or was it more mixed?
It's interesting because all of the sales and marketing teams that I worked with were usually women,
Yeah.
but leadership was always men. And at one
Interesting.
point I worked at parenting and baby talk magazine. So it was like older children and then babies and infants, right? And we were doing all these like marketing presentations about the experience of a mom. And the ones who were presenting it were the three leaders who were men. And I would just remember looking around going, does anyone see anything really wrong with this? That like the women are the ones who created the materials, but the men
Right.
are the ones who are presenting it?
It sounds like a sitcom. It really does. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah,
Yeah.
that's crazy. Well, can
Yeah.
you can you talk about your experience from that perspective, from being,
Sure.
a woman in that, and then how that maybe evolved into how you're targeting women in leadership today.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, my experience as a woman in leadership, let me just preface this by saying I have never been one to be afraid of speaking up. There are some situations where I have more hesitance than others,
Mhm.
but for the most part, I came out with an opinion. And so I spoke up when others did not. And I think I took that on as a bit of a responsibility. Like, well, if she's not going to speak up and I know she's scared or nervous or whatever the concern is, I'm going to speak up on her behalf. I want to help because this isn't right. So, and I got a lot of pushback for that. I mean, pretty much every performance review was like, you need to be less direct. You need to be, and I would always kind of look at them and go, do I though? Are
Hmm.
you sure? Like, I never took it seriously. I just couldn't because I knew where it was coming from.
Right.
So I had a bit of a rebelliousness about that. Not a bit. I was a bit of sorry, I said it again. I was a rebel about it. Like,
Yeah.
no, I don't actually believe you. And what I saw about women who were just so capable, so smart, so strategic, so the business savvy was just so high up. There were some women that I just thought, oh my God, if I could just think like she does and
Hmm.
see things like she does, right? This one woman had like this panoramic view of the business, like she could just take it all in and also have the emotive side of the business, but also have a shrewd negotiation,
Yeah.
you know? And that kind of stuff wasn't celebrated enough and wasn't rewarded. And as I went up and up and up in my career and then started consulting and seeing women in leadership, especially women in tech now that I'm in Seattle, right? Like women leading data analytics, like for the whole company, cybersecurity company and things like that, that were getting pushback in meetings and interrupted in meetings. And it just, to me, it's like, really, we're still here. This is still happening. And
Hmm.
while we cannot control the behavior of others, we can control how we relate to them and how we respond to them, and
Hmm.
how then we relate to ourselves. And so I started to, not started to, but I think I started to find language for something I always felt, which was, okay, if you're not going to be on my side, then I really need to be on my side.
Right. Yeah.
I need to not take your side about who I am and who I'm not. Because I
Mm.
did that for a very long time. You would tell me you're a this, and I'm like, oh, I'm a this. Oh, I'm too direct. Oh, this is going to work against me. No, actually, we don't have enough direct and clear communication in our world. And maybe it's clunky and sometimes it can come off as, abrasive. And I get that there's some refinement to it, right? Like I needed to refine, but the message was still, I'm speaking up here. I'm asking for what I need. I'm making a firm request.
Yeah.
And I would see women in the consulting and in a lot of my career, just the salary negotiations were subpar, and they were doing all the work.
Hmm. Yeah.
And the men in the lead, the men who they reported to, like, one was like a director, a senior director of something, and then her boss was a VP. And I'm like, so the VP is going to go present all this work you just did? What
Yeah.
is that? Why don't you get to do that?
Yeah.
And I realized we can't control all of it, but we can learn to be on our own sides and get out of our own way to command what we want
Hmm.
and be in charge. I can't be in control, but I can be in charge. And I can express disagreement, and I can express, I don't agree with you. Actually, Adam, I've done the work here and I'd like to present this.
Yeah.
I might not get it depending on the organization, right? Because we can't control that. But I can certainly have a better relationship to my own need to make that request.
Yeah.
Does that make sense when I say like the relationship to ourselves in order to take that action?
Yeah, it does. And I mean, it speaks to me too when you were talking about these performance reviews that say less direct. That sounded
Yeah.
like that was kind of that. I mean, the idea of that is we're we should be being reinforced for being direct and honest
Yeah.
in it's especially in a world where we're trying to kind of I don't know manipulate our way to different areas or things like that.
Mm.
That directness is something that I think organizations should crave. And
Yeah.
so Yeah, and so I think that that idea that you're talking about of it almost sounds like we shouldn't be living for the benefit of other people, but living for more for our true to ourselves. Is my understanding that correct?
True to ourselves, yes. And we should, I'm not going to put shoulds on it. I always want to have concern and compassion and consideration for what the people I am engaging with feel, experience, and have gone through that have driven how they show up today.
Right.
And I cannot pretzel myself for those things. I won't pretzel myself. I won't suffer or sell myself short or underestimate myself because of someone else. And that takes work, Adam.
Yeah.
I don't know who gets to a place where they never experience fear or they never experience, like, I don't actually like strive for that, to never experience fear or anxiety or worry or self-doubt, or any of that. I think it's not a matter of never experiencing those things. It's a matter of how long I stay in them.
Yeah.
And the older I get and the more aware I become of myself and who I am and what I'm capable of and what I bring to this world and my value and all of that, and like really connect to it and believe it, I can get in and out of that faster.
Wow. Yeah.
I can observe myself in the moment and go, oh, look at me. I'm afraid to open that email from a client responding to a really big proposal because I'm afraid they're going to say no. Oh, look at me. I'm afraid they're going to say no. Okay, open it. Right. So I can observe myself in those moments and go, I'm a grown ass woman. What am I scared of? A no? Right? Like a no. Okay. It's a no. That's fine. But I have more self mastery. And it's an ongoing, everyday thing I have to work on every day.
Wow.
Because I'm an emotional person. I experience things really deeply. I'm an empath. I feel my own emotions. My emotions can carry me away if I'm not, like paying attention to them, right? So to feel fear and to feel anxiety and self-doubt and wonder about your worth, it's something I've been experiencing lately is am I really who I believe myself to be? Like the person that's trying to do good in the world? It's not a matter of never experiencing those moments. It's a matter of how long I stay in them. And then do I make my choices around those feelings or do I make choices around what I want to create?
And what are some of your methods for how to, I guess, acknowledge
Yeah.
or realize that you're in those moments of fear and and
Yeah.
what do you do to get out of it?
Yeah, one of the big ones I recognize is if I have a physical reaction. Sometimes my heart will start to race. When I'm nervous, my heart will start to race really fast. And if I'm really nervous or have any kind of like real fear, my throat will start to close up a little bit.
Yeah.
So my body triggers me. Like it tells me like, hey, something's going on. You're feeling a thing. And so wherever I have the space and time to allow myself to acknowledge and name it, I name it. I'm like, okay, I'm feeling super anxious right now. I'm feeling a little scared right now. Like if I give it a name, it's kind of like you can face it, right?
Oh
Like
yeah.
then you know what you're working with. It's like, I got diagnosed with a autoimmune disease in 2017 called Graves' disease. But for about 9 months, I didn't know what was going on. And that was the hardest part of what was happening is because I didn't have a name for it. Once I had a name for it, then I could take action on it. So it's like until we have a name for something and know what it is, we can't do anything about it. But if I can name my emotion, which sounds a lot easier than it is sometimes,
Right.
I have more say and agency to decide how I want to respond to that emotion because emotions can take us and carry us away and have us making decisions that we didn't want to make. But if I can name the emotion, I get myself the chance to pause.
Yeah. Yeah. I that's the idea of naming your emotion. That's so powerful because I mean that's a similar exercise I went through when I was getting sober. It was just there's a fourth step inventory where you essentially part of that fourth step inventory is identifying your fears.
Yeah.
And that for me was like, as someone who grew up with anxiety, was this idea of like, writing out all of the fears I had and looking at them,
Yeah.
seeing them, naming them, acknowledging them, and sharing them with someone I trusted. It was so there was a piece that came with that. So
Yeah.
that really resonates, and I feel that.
Yeah.
And I can also recognize and relate to the idea that it's not always easy to name the emotion that you're feeling. It's
Hmm.
could look
Yeah.
like anger, but it's fear or whatever, right?
Yes. Yes, exactly. Yeah, emotions can be really tricky and they can tell
Yeah.
you all kinds of stories.
Yeah.
And I've learned enough to know that if I can, and I have the luxury of giving myself even 5 minutes
Hmm.
to figure out what exactly I'm feeling, I can recalibrate.
Yeah.
I don't need 24 hours all the time, like even 5 minutes, just to be able to give myself the privilege of naming my own emotion so that I can face it and then
Hmm.
work with it and
Yeah.
work through it.
And do you have a process for that as far as how you, once you name it, what does that 5 minutes look like in your
I mean,
life?
I say it out loud. Oh, okay, all right. And sometimes I joke with myself. Oh, look at me. There I go. Like I can be kind of cheeky with and sarcastic with myself. And then sometimes I just get up and walk away.
Yeah.
Well, some of this stuff happens at my desk in front of my computer screen, right? Where I'm like running my business and I'm doing it in a company of one and doing it on my own and experimenting with stuff and putting ideas out there. And sometimes I just need to get up and walk away and change the environment.
Yeah.
And sometimes I need to talk it out. So I'm a
Mhm.
verbal processor.
Yeah.
So I have a small handful of folks who I know I can have a extensive WhatsApp conversation with them if I need to, or we can hop on the phone and just hash something out so I can just talk it out and it processes it and
Mhm.
it breaks down the intensity of it as I talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm also a big journaler. I've journaled since I was, I don't know, as long 7 or 8, Hello Kitty diary with the little lock on it. Like those were my, formative years of journaling. Journaling can also help. I
Yeah.
write things out and scribble things out, and I come to new ideas and awarenesses when I do, because the brain works interestingly when you write with your hands versus
Yeah.
type, and so I can come up with stuff and work stuff out from that perspective too.
I like that.
And
Yeah.
and sometimes you don't have the luxury and you just have to push through.
Hmm.
And that's a reality too. Like, I don't have any time for this. I have to figure this out and move.
Right.
That can happen as well. But if you slash me, if I trust myself, then I've seen myself move through those moments before, so I know I will probably be fine.
Hmm. Yeah. It's, and do you feel like, um, and then when you feel other people, like you mentioned, you have that empathic feeling, right?
Yeah.
When you're feeling other people and their feelings and things like that, and you feel that escalation
Hmm.
in them,
Hmm.
how do you respond in situations where you can't control other people's emotions?
Yeah. So I have gotten good at not getting in the box with them.
Hmm.
So, because the last thing they need, especially in a coaching experience, is for their coach to be like, "Yeah, I know," right? To like be commiserating. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I've gotten very good at that. And I think it's just the knowledge that I am coach here. I am not me so that helps. But then also I have very often said, okay, I'm going to pause you for a second. If they're like if the train is going, I'm going to pause you for a second. Let's take a breath. And I tell them, let's take 30 seconds, turn off your camera, mute yourself so it's not awkward for you, turn it off. We'll both just breathe. And then we're going to come back. I
Hmm.
will interrupt it because sometimes it's not helpful for the train to just go, right? Like,
Right.
yes, sometimes we need to vent and just get it out and then we can deal with it. But I have seen times where like there's so much charge around what they're experiencing. We got to interrupt it so they can collect themselves.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I'll do that. And sometimes I will name it. It seems like you're really feeling blindsided, or it sounds like you just don't have trust right now. And that's really upsetting for you.
Hmm.
And if I can name it and sort of validate it with them, that's also really helpful, right? Because their experience is their experience. Like, it's true for them.
Right. Yes.
And I don't ever want to invalidate. So I will try and use my intuition to guess what's going on and give them some language when they don't have their own.
Yeah, that's helpful because it sounds like the idea of validating people's opinions, especially in those moments, as a coach, kind of distinguishes you from being a coach rather than a therapist, rather that's
Mm,
going to try and work them through
yeah.
personal, what have you. So what can you kind of now kind of transitioning into your coaching?
Yeah.
What kind of clients do you coach? What kind of executives? What are your targets, and
Yeah.
how do you approach that?
Yeah, so I actually do coach both men and women now. I used to primarily coach women, and then I noticed that there were men that were approaching me for coaching, and I thought, well, if this is what's coming, yeah, I'm a yes for it. So, and there's something really cool for me. That was a learning experience for me to start coaching men
Yeah.
in their careers and in their leadership. So primarily who I work with are people who are, I don't know, 15 years plus in their careers. They are in some level of leadership, and they are interested in feeling less stress and more ease.
Mm.
And they might not know exactly why or what's causing it, but they want to do better for themselves. They want to make more sound choices. They want to be able to make choices easier and not have doubt around them. They want to be able to have conflict and still remain steadfast. They want to be able to have relationships with people. They want to understand who they are and how they're showing up in the world so that they can make the most out of whatever it is they're choosing to do.
Hmm.
And I've coached, people in all kinds of industries from nonprofit to tech. It's not really about the industry; it's about where a person is
Hmm.
and what they're looking for. If you're looking for tactics, I'm not your girl.
Yeah.
I have many tactics. I've been trained in certifications all over the place, and so I have all kinds of tactics and tools. But the foundation of what we do is us getting connected to ourselves.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
sometimes that is just about some exploration and reflection.
Hmm. Can you
And
expand on that a little bit as far as
yeah,
how we do that?
yeah. So exploration, you can explore in any number of ways. Okay, so let me give you an example. So if someone says, I'm completely overwhelmed at work and they just keep piling more stuff on me and I'm not exactly sure how I'm doing because I get no feedback, but they're asking me to do more, so I must be doing a good job, but I'm just completely burned out and I don't even enjoy my work anymore. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is say, like, okay, well, what's the big question here? Like, what is it you're actually trying to sort out? Do you want to feel better? Do you want to be able to speak up? Do you want to just have less volume? Do you
Mm.
like what's the one question that needs answering in this moment? So we'll figure out like what are you actually trying to understand or do differently or feel differently about? And then we'll start to talk about what's preventing you from being able to have agency to change the volume of work or have a conversation that could be difficult or simply say no when they keep piling stuff. Like what's actually in your way?
Hmm. Yeah.
And that's when we get into things like the fear, the anxiety. I'm the primary income in my household, and so I don't want to rock the boat and shake it and possibly ruin a job where I have to care for my family and kids. So that's when we get into like the real nitty gritty stuff. Because a tactic is just a tactic. You want to know how to have a conversation with someone about saying no, you can say, listen, I really appreciate you wanting to give me more work. I can tell I'm adding value and I don't have time. So if you want me to do this, then help me figure out what we can remove from my plate. That's a tactic. Done, right?
Right.
But being able to say that without feeling scared that they're going to punish you or it will make you look like you can't handle it or you look weak in front of them by saying that's where the real work is.
Yeah, that man, that is such the big challenge there, and you're so right that trying to get answers to the questions of like, how am I going? I mean, they're big existential questions of like, how am I going to provide for my family
Yeah,
if I approach this subject and all of this stuff? That's man, that's always hard, and I think we all deal with that. Everyone can benefit from some tips on that.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean we all have responsibilities and things that pull at us that
yeah,
can stop us from doing what we want to do. So there is, and some of that needs to be like just it is just what it is. It's reality, right? Like you've
right.
got a home and you have two children and one's about to go off to college. Like you can't really rock the boat with your well-paying job. Like you want to pay
Right.
for your kid to go to school. I totally get it. So then what's a tightrope that you can walk so that you can find a way where you are not suffering but you can still fulfill your responsibilities? Or can we put a timeline on it? Or is it simply a conversation you've been afraid to have? Or like there's a million things to
Yeah.
explore. So you don't have to shirk your responsibilities in order to do what you want in your life, right?
Hmm.
That you don't have to give up one to have another. But the fear and the anxiety can often prevent us from seeing any options to help ourselves. or we only see the bad, like two bad options, right? Like, well, it's either going to
Right.
be this or this, and both of
Yeah.
them suck. Right? It's actually no, there could be like a phased approach, a hybrid approach. There could be any number of things we could come up with if we can move past the emotion that's getting in our way.
Yeah. Wow. At the emotion that's getting in our way. And then, that kind of gets to that idea between of the feelings versus emotions that we're
Hmm.
feeling. So you're saying emotions might be getting in the way.
Hmm.
How, how may they be showing up, and what can we do aside from like looking at this, just being aware of it to really acknowledge those emotions that might be getting in the way? Like
Yeah.
maybe we want to make a big change in our career, but we have to
Hmm.
support our families or
Hmm.
what have you,
Hmm.
and that emotion of fear is in the way.
Hmm.
How do we approach something like that?
I think trying to understand where my special blend of fear is coming from. What is it exactly I'm fearful of?
Yeah.
I had a coach once do this thing, and you may have heard of this tactic or experienced this, where what are you scared of? And I answered, okay, and then what's behind that? And then what's behind that? And we went down and layer by layer by layer, and what's behind that? And at the end of it, I think it was something like, I'm afraid they won't think I'm smart enough, which ultimately is I'm afraid I'm not enough.
Yeah.
That was where my path led me. And if I do this thing and it doesn't succeed, then it means I'm not enough. So I think there are layers to the fear. I think there are many layers to our emotions, and sometimes these emotions can be habitual. I know for me, like sometimes my emotional response to things back in the day was just habit.
Hmm.
This is how I respond when someone disagrees with me,
Right.
as
Yeah.
opposed to taking the time to actually get reflective about like, why do I respond that way? What
Yeah.
what is that actually about? But I had to have some kind of guide. I couldn't do it on my own. It's really hard for us to be objective about ourselves until we start to practice and have some tools, whether that's positive psychology, coaching, therapy. There's a million ways to understand ourselves, a million beautiful ways, right? But
Right.
something to have to butt up against so that we're not just like in this free flowing panic attack. And I
Hmm.
use panic attack loosely and lightly here. I don't mean that literally, but like, unless it is a panic attack, which it could also be,
Right.
So I don't know if I answered the question, Adam. Like, you did say something though that I wanted. You said emotions versus feelings.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear your thoughts on that too, because I do have a thought about that and a lot of reading and studying that I've done. An emotion is technically a physiological response,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
What I think it can happen for us is we then make it mean something about us usually. And then there's a story attached to my emotion. And
Hmm.
then that becomes a feeling. And the feelings can last for days or months or years at a time. Adam said this thing to me. It must mean that I am not good enough because he said this thing to me. And now I have this emotion and this feeling and this story about Adam and about myself.
Hmm.
I'm being very simplistic about this, but I think we can often do this in our day to day experiences with our emotions. I'm not talking about trauma. I'm not talking about those. I, I, I set that aside a little bit, but the day to day interactions that we have with our partner, with our families, with our work, and our colleagues, we have a million emotions and they can come and go. But then when we attach meaning to them, they stick around
Yeah. Yeah.
and they can erode us.
Yeah. Yeah. And you'd mentioned, you'd asked how, my thoughts on that. When you
Yeah,
mentioned the
please.
story part of it, that really stuck to me, because really the stories about our emotions and our feelings. And I agree with the connection you're making there, and totally see that as the, the connection of, that emotion is that thing, the feeling is how we interpret it. And then that story is the thing that kind of links the two. And that
Yeah.
story is something we mostly have control over. I mean,
Yeah.
to a significant degree. I mean,
Yeah.
I've through the people I've interviewed on this show, just on this show, and the incredible, not incredible in a great way necessarily, but incredible things that they've been through, like
Mm.
soldiers who have been to war, people who have PTSD, people who
Yeah.
have these and people that have seemingly what may be interpreted as others to be not as dire of a circumstance, but in their mind it's
Yeah.
it's incredibly painful.
Yeah.
And all of that is kind of around story. And,
Yeah.
and, and so really reshaping that story, it's not an easy process, but
Mm.
it sounds like that's where you come in and people like you to help people maybe reframe that story. Am I
Yeah.
interpreting that correctly?
Yeah. Yeah. Coaching on a really great day, hopefully, is giving the client a loving mirror.
Yeah.
Because when we're in our own heads, all we have is our story and our interpretation, our perspective. So with a coach, or again, a therapist, or even a friend. I mean, it doesn't just have to be coaching, but what I do is I hope to offer some method of reflection so that we become more self-aware, because the more self-aware we are about anything, the more access we have to change it if it's not working for us.
Hmm.
The more self-aware we are, the more access we have to change something if it's not working. But if we aren't aware of it, how can we change it? How can we address it? That's why naming the emotion is so important.
Mm.
That's why, someone saying to me, my husband has done this several times. We've been together now for 5 years, and there have been a few poignant moments when he's said, I don't understand why you respond that way. And that has caused, it's a mirror in my face, and it has caused me to go, yeah, that's a little weird. Why do I respond that way? And
Right.
in for those moments, like, the behavior changed. And not everything is that simple, by
Right.
any means, but I can see how when we have our own awareness of something, when someone puts a mirror or reflects back to us, we see it for what it is, and then we have the chance to go, okay, so what is that about?
Hmm. Yeah.
But we do have to take time for that, and it's not easy. And
Yeah.
in our lives that move so fast, with all the things to produce and do and finish and check off, that stuff can get deprioritized and deprioritized and deprioritized.
100%. Yeah. That's
And
so
then
true.
someone, yeah, then someone asks you, well, what do you want? And you're like, well, I don't know,
Hmm.
because it's been deprioritized so many times.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I've reflected on that idea of when we get mindful about our ideas of our emotions or how we respond or react in the world. And that idea of mindfulness, I mean, I've heard many times that it's just really two things. It's awareness, so
Hmm.
self-awareness, and
Hmm.
curiosity. And
Hmm.
that's such a simple and powerful approach to that idea of just, kind of reflecting on how we work. Very simply, just is self-awareness, just be aware, and take that second to be aware and then get curious about it. It takes us out of that situation to
Yeah.
maybe get aware and curious about those
Yeah.
situations. And you'd mentioned something in some of the notes that I have from you. You have a question here that really struck me, and I'm really curious on your thoughts on this because
Yeah.
the question is pretty unique. It's how we have the power of our intellect to right size our fears. What does that mean?
Yeah. So I think I was having a conversation with a friend a year ago or something, and we were talking about emotions and
Hmm.
our ability to handle our emotions and quote unquote manage our emotions, right? And this is forever a fascinating thing for me, because there are times when I am very able to see my emotions, name my emotions, navigate them, process them, and then we're done, right?
Yeah, right.
All very practical and rational. And then there are times when there's not a chance in, what, that I'm going to be able to manage my emotions in this moment. It's just not, like, all hope has flown out the window.
Right.
And I think that there are many components, but one component that she brought up and she said to me was, I think it's the ability to be intellectual and think about it that is
Hmm.
helpful.
Hmm.
If I can, this is a very rational approach to emotion, right? Like, if I can apply some intellectual muscle and think about my emotions, like, what is this? Why am I having this? What does this actually mean? And get, like, thinky about it. It can help me calm the emotion. Not
Hmm.
always, but sometimes. And I don't think, I really believe that when we have an intellectual approach sometimes to something that isn't intellectual, like a feeling or an emotion or an experience, it can help make it right sized and sort of when I say right sized, I mean put perspective on it.
Yeah.
Bring it back down to what it actually is, because sometimes we have responses to things that are completely disproportionate to what has actually happened. You know, you read an email and someone says something and you're like, what is this? And then you go back to it an hour later and you're like, oh, they didn't really mean that. That's not what they meant at all.
Well, I read too much into the tone of the voice. Yeah.
Yeah, but the message was at a 2 and your
Yeah.
response is at a 12.
Right.
There's a huge gap between them. So when I say right size, I mean like reducing that gap and having the appropriate level of response to something. But if something is triggering or hits an old wound or hits that Zovig's not smart enough, which was for a long time a thing for me. Like they're going to think I'm not smart enough because I don't understand the math and how the technical stuff. I just don't. I'm not. I'm a watercolor. I don't think in that way. But for a long time, I thought that was a big deficit. So if you hit on anything that was like in that soft spot of I'm not smart enough, my reaction to it was like so intense. And being able to think about it and go, why am I reacting this way? Where did this come from? Why do I feel I need to? Who are they to me? Why is their opinion so important to me? If I can intellectualize it, it can help me right size the emotion. Not always, but sometimes. And I think, I'm a deep thinker, Adam, and I think many of us are deep thinkers. And we have that, like our intellectual capacity is high and wide and deep to think about things.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so,
especially in leadership. Absolutely. Yeah.
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 Yeah. And so I think sometimes a rational intellectual approach can help when there is high emotion. You have to be smart about it because if you're telling somebody to calm down, that's not going to work. Not going to work.
That has never worked in the history
Never
of the world,
worked.
I don't think. Yes.
Nope. So, I had someone say to me, take a breath. And I was like, like it was ready. The breath was ready to breathe fire. I mean, that's how that felt.
Right.
I think that if we can find a way to think through some of our emotions, give ourselves the luxury of thinking through some of our emotions, we can right size them, still feel them, have them, experience them, and then move through them. I hope that answers that question.
It does. Give ourselves the luxury of giving ourselves the chance to think through that. And that's so beautifully put. And a great place to kind of put a cap on this conversation, which has been amazing. And I'm really grateful for you
Thank
being here
you.
today.
Me
And if
too.
people want to reach out for you for your speaking, because you're speaking, that's
Yep.
where we've met
Yes.
through heroic public speaking and your executive coaching.
Yeah.
How can people reach out to you?
Yeah. So you can find me on my website at boldnessablazecoaching.com. Or you can reach out to me through email at zovig@boldnessablaze.com or find me on LinkedIn. I hang out on LinkedIn a lot. Zovig Garboushian, would love to connect and get to know folks who are your listeners and connected with you, Adam.
Definitely. Yeah. And there's a great overlap between, you and I, Zovig, I think, as far as our message is concerned. So anybody that's connected on this show, I think you would benefit a lot from following Zovig
Thank
on
you.
at least LinkedIn and going to boldnessablaze.com and learning more about her, because it's been a pleasure of mine to get to know Zovig and hear her message firsthand on stage, which I was really thrilled to hear her story. And I'm really glad you're here. Thank you for being here, Zovig.
Thank
Thanks
you
so
for
much.
having me, Adam. I'm really grateful to be here with you too.
Thank you. And to everyone out there, thank you for being here. If you like this episode, please share it with a friend and don't forget to subscribe and rate. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Hey, everyone. I hope you're enjoying this episode. If you've been listening for a while, you know how important community and mentorship is to living a life of abundance above your fears. If you want to connect with me, hear about new offerings, episodes, and strategies to live with conviction, courage, and clarity, then sign up for my newsletter now. It's a way to stay connected to me outside of social media and bring a little empowerment to your inbox, and maybe a few dad jokes here and there. Sign up now at adamcliffordhill.com. Now back to the show. Hey, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the Flow Over Fear podcast. If you'd like to learn more about getting into flow and learn the foundations of flow, I have a free video series on my website at www.adamcliffordhill.com called The Foundations of Flow. Feel free to go there and download it and start your journey to rising above fear and achieving greater flow in your life. And if you like this episode, and I'm guessing you did if you stuck around for this long, then please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button, and you will receive notifications when I have new interviews, new recaps, and new trainings that pop up on YouTube. Thanks again for joining us.